Less than a year after it happened, and already it's hard to tell what these villages went through. Typically English houses, pleasant, unremarkable, the kind reporters describe as neat semis with trim gardens. There are still one or two clues. Farm outhouses looking more than usually derelict. Extensive renovations to a local pub, while the regulars drink in a porter cabin. But generally, the area is looking much as it did a year ago. Ordinary homes for ordinary families, an ordinary Saturday tea time in June. On television, England's schoolboys had just beaten West Germany 4-0, and the children were waiting for Doctor Who. Instead, the blast.
It was 10 times louder than the height of Alamein, which was, I thought, was L5 itself.
The floor shook as it was like an earthquake starting.
Just whoosh, up she went.
The blast at Nipro's chemical plant at Flixborough on South Humberside was Britain's worst peacetime explosion. 28 people died and 155 were injured. The insurance companies expect to pay out £36 million before every claim is settled. The Nipro plant blew up at 7 minutes to 5. Most witnesses recall some kind of preliminary disturbance.
There was this rumble. We looked out of the window towards, the right of the laboratory, and there's sort of laboratories here, you have the section here, and we saw this white fume, big cloud just gushing out of that section.
That's part of the works?
That is part of the works, yeah.
What did you think the white fumes were?
Didn't really know what there was at that time. Only thinking about it later, I know it wasn't steam.
Then when it came out, there was gas leaking from a pipe across there. It appeared to be gas, it was like brown smoke. And then before it could go into the cabin, there was a terrific explosion with simply blown on our faces in the cabin.
The substance which blew up at Flixborough was cyclohexane, a sort of refined petrol used in the production of nylon. Like petrol, cyclohexane is highly inflammable. It had blown up before, notably in incidents in Holland, the United States, and on Teesside 4 years previously, when one man was killed and several injured. Within minutes of the explosion, firemen and rescue workers began to pour into the Nipro site. But hours went by before anyone, even the firemen, could get any idea of what had happened. No one knew how many workers were likely to be in the plant on Saturday afternoons. No one at first knew just what had blown up, or indeed if anything else was likely to explode. Later that Saturday evening, it emerged that a massive escape of cyclohexane was probably responsible. But at 5:30, only one thing was clear: the scale of the disaster. A witness later described the effect of the blast as beyond nightmare. Not a single house in the vicinity escaped undamaged. One row of semis immediately opposite the works was completely wrecked, including the home of a family about to emigrate to Australia. As night fell on the Saturday, comparisons with the Blitz sprang readily to mind. The scale of the firefighting operation was certainly of 1940 proportions. 40 pumps were used to combat the Flixborough blaze. Britain's biggest wartime fire needed only 10 more. Brigades came from as far away as the Midlands. As the Saturday night wore on, there were conflicting reports and rumours as to how many had died. At one stage, it was feared that more than 100 could have perished. The early editions of the Sunday papers guessed at 30, 50, 80. Theories also started to emerge about the cause of the disaster. Already, experts were talking about a temporary pipe between two cyclohexane tanks, which had apparently collapsed. This weak link theory has remained the most widely held. "3,000 people from 7 villages were evacuated on the Saturday night to escape the fume-laden cloud which poured from the fire. Together with the scores made homeless, they found shelter with friends and relatives and at several emergency centres.
There we are, though. Would you let Mother like some? Another time?
Sunday morning. For the first time, it was possible to get some idea of the havoc caused by the explosion. Walls cracked, roof beams split, whole buildings shifted out of alignment, literally thousands of windows shattered. The chairman of NIPRO said at the time, "If I'd wanted to sabotage the plant, I could not have planted a bomb that would have caused as much damage." It seemed incredible that no one outside the works was killed. It seemed almost as incredible that people could discuss what had happened to them. But as the villagers surveyed their wrecked homes, they were able to talk with that strange fluency that disaster so often inspires.
It hasn't sunk in yet. Every time you go in the house, you just think, well, God Almighty, we're still alive. You know, when you see the damage inside the house, you just can't take it in. Last night when I went to bed, every time I closed my eyes, I could see that thing going. I was stood here watching it, you see. I could just see this big flash. It's like a nightmare.
But, as always, people coped. As the big clear-up got underway on Sunday, the initial shock began to subside a bit. In some ways, people seemed curiously cheerful about it all. It was, as they say, just like the Blitz.
Is this your house?
Yeah, it was, yeah. Was.
What are you doing now?
Honestly, I don't really know what I'm doing here. I just bugger off and leave it. Because look at it. Ceilings are down, it's buggered, isn't it?
Chaos, absolute chaos.
What about these fellows here? Any losses at all?
These are all right. Because the young fixers are going to suffer unless we can get some windows and roofs back on.
Have some died already?
A few last night, yes. Wherever you look, it's absolute chaos. Terrible.
"4 miles from the plant, in the centre of Scunthorpe, windows and doors had been shattered. Even at that distance, people had been thrown to the ground by the force of the blast. The explosion played strange tricks. In some places, badly damaged houses stood side by side with buildings that seemed hardly touched. Not all the damage, though, was immediately apparent. One builder commented that a good deal of structural weakness could make itself felt much later. Throughout Sunday, though, the emphasis was on self-help and patching up obvious damage.
blame anybody, and we don't think there's anything, well, you know, we don't blame anybody, there's no anger at all or anything. We still just shook up and can't believe it's happened. I still think we're waking up tomorrow. But I don't know really if they did build them up. We should have to wait and see what sort of a house they built as to coming out here. I suppose we might do it. It's going to take a bit of doing though.
Would you want the plant over there to be rebuilt again?
My God, no. No. We've been proud of Nipro because it's always looked so nice at night, and we've sat fascinated watching it. Never dreamt that this would be the result of it.
Back at the Nipro site, the struggle continued. The pall of smoke seemed to cover the entire district. A disturbing new factor emerged, talk of possible radioactive fallout. The rumour seemed appropriate, with the whole district looking so much like a nuclear-devastated landscape. At this stage, Sunday afternoon, only 8 bodies had been recovered from the wreckage. But at last it was possible to confirm that about 30 people had died. All but 2 were Nipro employees working in the control room of the oxidization section. The other 2 were a tanker driver and an outside workman. The scale of the firefighting operation is something that can be measured solely in terms of men and pumps. It's harder to measure and quantify the effort expended by individual firemen. But whatever the rulebook demands, what was given was immeasurably in excess of it. The voluntary workers, too, poured into the site. A local hot dog man handed over his entire stock. A shopkeeper donated 7,000 cigarettes. 6,000 free cups of tea went on the Sunday alone. Statistics which don't appear in official reports.
Nobody wants any sandwiches. Can't give sandwiches away. Sandwiches?
It was never possible to relax for long. On Sunday afternoon, the nuclear radiation rumour seemed to materialise alarmingly. There was an announcement of a possible massive leak of radioactive material.
No, leave it.
I'm not allowing anybody near that.
Yeah.
Okay.
Or in downstream of it.
Not downstream.
No.
This we anticipate will only be a few minutes. Now, is that the last message we've sent?
Radiation source cesium-127 loose somewhere on the south side of the site.
Yeah.
All personnel have been evacuated for the purposes of screening and locating the source.
Have we not sent anything since then?
No.
Right, we'll send another message then. The source has been located and is believed to be secure.
The state of the Nipro site was one of such confusion that it was to take a fortnight before even half the bodies were recovered. It was a fearsome task. Most of the firemen close to the blaze worked up to their knees in contaminated water. Some of them worked for 20 hours without a break. Some were virtually ordered off to rest. With the immediate task of fighting the blaze underway, attention turned to more long-term problems. MPs and local councillors came to try and establish what kind of government and local authority help was needed. On Sunday afternoon, the Coal Board chairman, Sir Derek Ezra, arrived. With Dutch State Mines, the National Coal Board are joint owners of Nipro, and the press were anxious to hear Sir Derek's thoughts on the subject of compensation. But for the villagers, getting information proved a more difficult task.
What about the question of compensation?
I don't know anything about it. I haven't seen anybody in power out like that yet. Apparently there's a meeting going to start at the Boozer. I'm off up to in a minute. I'll maybe find out some more there.
It fell to the local council clerk to address the village meeting. Not surprisingly, tempers were short.
I think some of you are having difficulty laying your hands on private builders to get the small stuff done. That... all right. Some of you have been told not to get private builders in. Who told you, dear? Rumour? Well, give him a chance. Well, I'll tell you then.
How can you know about whether it's a rumour or not? This is the first official meeting called, isn't it?
Yeah, that's why I'm here.
The residents of the village. We've called it, yeah.
Yeah, that's why we're here. We're concerned to get something done.
Come and see us yesterday then, eh? As the representative of Nybro, as part control of Nybro, why didn't he come and meet the people instead of sending you? I should think you're about the lowest he could get to send.
He didn't send me. He's Kelboard.
I think what's being done, the best is being done. It was possible under the circumstances, but obviously people are anxious. The shock is just beginning to come out in people.
Yeah.
And it's a very difficult time for them.
6 days after the explosion, the Employment Secretary, Michael Foote, visited the Nipro site. He expressed his horror at the disaster, but his main announcement was of more profound interest, not only to the villagers, but to the whole petrochemical industry.
Well, of course, every sensible person, that includes all of those in the government who are responsible for it and in the factory inspectorate who will be learning lessons from it, of course we will do everything possible to learn the proper lessons. But what I'm saying to you is, and I'm sure you appreciate, is that the proper way for those lessons to be learned is to have a public inquiry. That's why we announced it immediately. Have a proper public inquiry by independent people who will make their report, and that's the way to learn the lessons properly.
The inquiry lasted for 7 months. Its report is about to be published. So what actually caused the Flixborough disaster? While not anticipating the inquiry report, it is possible to examine the main theories which emerged during the hearing. There seems little dispute that this was the source of the main explosion, Nipro's oxidization plant, where one of 6 reactors containing cyclohexane had been removed for maintenance. It had been replaced by a temporary 20-inch bypass pipe. Somehow, this 20-inch pipe collapsed and released a vast cloud of cyclohexane vapor, which ignited. But how did the 20-inch pipe collapse? 2 theories have emerged, the so-called one-event theory and the two-event theory. The one-event idea is supported by the Transport and General Workers' Union, who held their own inquiry into the disaster. It was conducted by Victor Marshall, senior lecturer in chemical engineering at Bradford University.
Where the trouble occurred, where there were a number of mistakes made in the design, installation, testing and support of this bypass. For example, the lines which had originally connected the 2 reactors together each had a bellows in them. These bellows were to take up expansion and contraction due to changes in temperature. And bellows are necessarily thin in order that they shall be flexible. Provided they're not subjected to undue distortion, they are in fact reasonably strong. But if once they become bent or distorted, then there is a danger of the bellows collapsing. In my view, the bellows did collapse. This was brought about because the bypass had this bend in it. It's been called a dogleg bypass. And this dogleg produced a set of unbalanced forces which caused the entire assembly to tend to rotate just as though it was the driving wheel of a steam locomotive. The bellows became distorted and burst, This was the noise, in my view, which was heard by the majority of eyewitnesses and which they claim to have occurred between half and a minute of the main explosion.
That's how the 20-inch pipe collapsed, according to the one-event theory. But then there's the other suggestion, the idea that there was a smaller explosion in a narrow 8-inch pipe elsewhere before the 20-inch pipe collapsed. This is the two-event theory, the theory of a trigger explosion. How did this theory emerge? In the minds of engineers who examined the wreckage. Technical author Patrick Kinnersley, who studied the two-event theory, explains.
By looking closely at the eyewitness evidence, they find that, in fact, most of the eyewitnesses are talking about a preliminary event between 30 seconds, say, and up to a minute before the main explosion. Focusing back on this pipe, they find that the damage in that pipe cannot be explained easily by the heat produced in a general fire. It seems to have been heated up to 950 degrees centigrade, which implies a localized fire. And so they've started to look for possible causes of a localized hotspot at that place, which is found nowhere else in the plant.
Let's go back to the reactor tanks to examine the theory in detail. This time we look at the tanks from the rear. From tank number 4, the big, flexible pipe, 20 inches in diameter, leads across the gap where number 5 tank was removed. But behind tanks 2 and 3 is the narrower 8-inch pipe of stainless steel. What's suggested is that the source of the trouble was a valve in that pipe. After the disaster, experts found that 2 bolts had been loose on the valve. Cyclohexane escaped through the loose connections, ignited, and acted like a blowtorch on the pipe. The metal eventually split, a process known as creep cavitation, and cyclohexane poured out. The initial explosion which followed, according to the two-event school, was the trigger which caused the big 20-inch pipe to collapse, bringing about the second and major explosion. Patrick Kinnersley.
The two-event theory, whether or not it's accepted by the Court of Inquiry, is vital because it has shown the chemical industry that there is an alternative scenario of disaster, much more serious scenario than any that they've been thinking of in the past. The 8-inch pipe is a perfectly standard piece of engineering found in chemical plants throughout the country, and we must understand the ways in which that could fail through creep cavitation and just how quickly it can happen.
But whatever the basic cause of the explosion, there's no doubt that the scale of the disaster resulted directly from the collapse of the 20-inch bypass pipe. But how did the cyclohexane cloud come to explode so massively? Victor Marshall.
In a sense, you can regard the reactors as being a giant pressure cooker. And it's as though you had in the domestic sphere a pressure cooker that was filled with petrol, which you removed the pressure weight. If you then struck a match about a minute or 2 minutes later, you'd wreck the house. Now, this is the kind of thing that we imagine happened at Flixborough. You had reactors, each of them holding perhaps about 30 or 40 tons of cyclohexane. When the pressure was released, it released the pressure from all 5 of these reactors, and perhaps 30 or 40 tons of cyclohexane were able to vaporize and form this enormous cloud. When it exploded, it would explode with something like the equivalent of that weight of TNT exploding.
At Sheffield University's Department of Fuel Technology in Derbyshire, Victor Marshall carried out an experiment to illustrate his comparison of the cyclohexane reactors at Flixborough to a pressure cooker. He filled a specially adapted cooker with petrol and heated it until the pressure inside had reached a level of 2 atmospheres. A meths burner was placed downwind to provide a source of ignition. Then the pressure was released. question that remains, though, is how did the cyclohexane cloud ignite?
Undoubtedly, on the Flixborough site, there were sources of naked flame. These were quite a long distance away, and in the design of the plant, I've no doubt it was assumed that it was highly unlikely that cyclohexane vapor would ever be able to make its way from the cyclohexane plant to the plant where there were the naked flames. It was because of the enormous size of the cloud that this was possible. It's also possible that ignition occurred nearer at hand, that the initial failure of the bypass might, for example, have broken some electrical wiring, some overhead lighting or something of this sort. But it was inevitable that this cloud would sooner or later find a source of ignition. If it happened to found it on the factory, it could quite easily have drifted away and ignited at Flixborough village from somebody smoking in his front garden. And the death roll might have been even more serious.
A memorial service was held in Flixborough for the 28 who were killed. There is now awaited the inquiry report into why they died, its technical causes, the lessons to be learned. But the cost in human life of the explosion at Flixborough has already been paid. Perhaps also, said the Bishop of Grimsby, who conducted the service, there's an extra price to be paid in the very quality of our lives.
The truth is it not, that we can't satisfy our increasingly sophisticated requirements and meet all the growing appetites of our consumer society and still hope to retain the green and pleasant fields of English rural society in undisturbed peace and security. Is it not true that as in every discipline we break through barriers of knowledge and technology, we do by these very advances, which are to enrich life, we make life yet more precarious. Just one slip and the abyss